All right, let's dive into the story of King Jehoash of Israel. Now, his short reign, which was roughly from 798 to 782 BC, was this incredible, dramatic turning point for a kingdom that was right on the verge of collapse. It's a wild story of military triumph built on a really shaky foundation of spiritual compromise, and it has a powerful lesson about what success actually means. So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the absolutely desperate situation he walked into. Then, things get weird. We'll cover a bizarre and powerful final prophecy from the prophet Elisha. After that, we'll see how the tide of war turns almost overnight. We'll also dig into a civil war that was started, basically because a rival king got a little too big for his britches. And finally, we'll put it all in context to understand his true and kind of tragic legacy. So let's set the scene, shall we? When Jehoash takes the throne, Israel is in an absolute crisis. I mean, he isn't inheriting some thriving, powerful nation. He is taking over a kingdom that has been battered, bruised, and beaten down for decades. To really get what's going on, you have to understand the major players in the region. For years and years, Israel's main enemy, Aram Damascus, had been just relentlessly crushing them. But now, there's a new superpower on the block, Assyria. The Assyrian king starts pushing west, and his campaigns put a ton of pressure on Aram. So here's the key takeaway. Israel's biggest enemy is suddenly distracted. They're weakened, and this gives Jehoash a window, an opportunity his father could only have dreamed of. But, and this is a big but, here's the catch. Even with this golden political opportunity, nothing changes on the inside. The text is crystal clear. Jehoash kept up the sins of Jeroboam. And that's a reference to this state-sponsored religious system, the one with the golden calves, that was set up centuries before as a political move to keep people from worshiping in Jerusalem. So while the winds of war are changing, there is zero spiritual reform happening at home. And that brings us to our second point, which is where the story gets really, really interesting. King Jehoash, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of respect, goes to visit the legendary prophet Elisha, who is now a very old man on his deathbed. Believe it or not, this one single meeting is going to set the course for the rest of his entire reign. As Jehoash is weeping over the dying prophet, he cries out this incredible line. Now, what does he actually mean by that? He's not just being poetic. He is admitting something huge, that the real defense of Israel, its actual chariots and horsemen, isn't its physical army. It's the prophetic power of God, represented by Elisha. He gets it, even if he doesn't fully live by it. And get this is what's so amazing about this moment. Those are the exact same words Elisha himself had shouted decades earlier when his mentor, the prophet Elijah, was taken up to heaven. It's this incredible echo across generations, a deep understanding of where real power actually comes from. So Elisha, on his deathbed, gives the king this series of, they're pretty strange commands. It's a symbolic, prophetic act. First, he says, shoot an arrow eastward, towards your enemy Aram. Elisha calls it the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. So victory is promised. But then comes the second part of the test. Elisha tells him to take the arrows and strike the ground. So Jehoash does, but only 3 times. And Elijah is furious. He basically tells the king, you should have struck 5 or 6 times, you could have had it all. So the critical point here is that the king's limited effort, his half-hearted obedience, is only going to get him a partial victory. He'll win, sure, but he won't get the total annihilation of his enemy that was on the table. And wouldn't you know it, just like Elisha predicted, that prophecy quickly becomes a reality on the battlefield. That symbolic act in a quiet room translates into very real, very concrete military results. So how many times does Jehoash defeat Aram? Exactly 3. The new king of Aram, Ben-Hadad, gets beaten 3 separate times, just like Jehoash had struck the ground 3 times. I mean, the connection couldn't be more direct. You have to understand, these victories were a massive turning point for Israel. The nightmare of oppression under Aram finally came to an end. Jehoash took back cities and territories that had been lost for years. For the first time in a very long time, Israel was on the rise again. Okay, so you'd think with his northern enemy dealt with, he could finally relax, right? Well, wrong. A new challenge pops up, this time from the south, from his own relatives in the kingdom of Judah. The king of Judah, a guy named Amaziah, is feeling pretty good about himself after a recent victory, and he gets arrogant. He decides he's going to pick a fight with Joash. And Jehoash's response? Oh, it's one of the greatest insults in the entire historical record. He sends back this little story. He calls the cocky King Amaziah a thistle, a prickly weed, making demands of a cedar, this majestic, powerful symbol of strength. And the punchline? A wild animal just happens to walk by and crushes the thistle without even noticing. It is a brutal, humiliating way of saying, stay home, you are way out of your league. Of course, Amaziah doesn't listen. His pride is just too big. He presses the attack, and the two armies meet. The result? It was a total disaster, just like the parable predicted. Judah is completely routed, and in the ultimate shame, King Amaziah himself is captured right there on the battlefield. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an absolute humiliation. Jehoash marches on Jerusalem, tears down a huge section of its defensive wall, and then loots the treasures from both the temple and the royal palace. It was a complete catastrophe for Judah, and it cemented Israel's position as the top dog in the region. So let's just take a step back. Jehoash has defeated Aram in the north and completely subjugated Judah in the south. By all accounts, his reign is a stunning success. But to really understand his legacy, we have to zoom out and see what this all actually led to. This table really lays out the paradox of his reign, doesn't it? When it came to spiritual matters, a clear failure. He never once tried to reform the nation's corrupt worship. But militarily and politically, he was an absolute superstar. He ended the Aramaean threat, established dominance over Judah, and totally set the stage for this unprecedented era of wealth and power under his son, Jeroboam II. But here's the kicker. Look at this timeline. The recovery that Jehoash started and the golden age under his son, it was an incredibly brief window. That weakened Assyrian empire that gave him his opening in the first place, well, it came roaring back under a new, ruthless king. And just 60 years after Jehoash's death, that same Assyrian empire would completely and totally wipe the northern kingdom of Israel off the map forever. And that leaves us with this final haunting question. It's really the central mystery of Joash's entire legacy. How is it possible for a kingdom to achieve its greatest external strength, its most dominant political position, its biggest military victories, just a few short decades before its final, irreversible destruction?